Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today to celebrate World Photography Day. My name is Karthik Satyanarayan. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Wildlife SOS. And today, I'm happy to introduce to you an award-winning wildlife photographer, Jayanth Sharma. He spent his entire day today traveling just so he could join us on this webinar today. He's going to share with us some very valuable field secrets about wildlife photography, and he's also going to answer some of our questions about photography out there in the field when we are photographing elusive animals, birds, and reptiles. Giant has won several national and international wildlife photography awards. He's also the founder and CEO of Toehold, a travel and photography company based out of Bangalore. Welcome, Giant. It's such a pleasure to have you with us today on the occasion of World Photography Day. The format that we have today for today's webinar is that we'll start with a brief presentation that Giant is going to share with all of us. And I'm sure he's going to throw in some incredible photos and videos, possibly, where he's going to share his journey about being a wildlife photographer. I'm sure he'll share some of his interesting adventures, experiences, possibly some tips and tricks on how to get that perfect shot that we all try when we're out there in the field. And also, I hope he will highlight photography can help protect and conserve the natural world, because each of us, in every one of us, there is a photographer. We have these images in our heads, and we try to take these images on our phones, cameras, and other devices, and we want to share that, and that will show people what natural beauty exists all around us. Following this presentation from Giant, we will then have a question answer session. So I'd request all of you to please write in your questions along with your email address in the chat box, so that in the event we run out of time during the webinar and we are unable to address your question during the webinar, we'll make sure that we get you an answer by email.
Hi everybody.
There we go. Finally, I see you, Jayant. Thank you for
Hi.
joining us. How are you doing?
Very well, Karthik. Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you for driving all of today from, I think you were in the jungle, right? In Kabini.
Yeah, I was in Kabini.
Tell me you had some good sightings last evening or this morning. I'd
Yes.
love to hear that.
Yes. Today morning was pretty wet. It was raining. Yesterday evening, we had a male tiger, which they call the tiger tank male. And we followed him for a long time, and we tracked him, and we had a great evening. It was fantastic to see a cat like that.
Amazing. Well, thank you again for joining us, Giant, on the talk this evening, on the webinar. I think we've had probably nearly 1,000 people register for this webinar. So I think there's a lot of eager people out there waiting to see your presentation. So, we should just go on with that. And then after the presentation, I'm hoping that you can, give us some, answer some of our questions. And I think we have a lot of questions pouring into the chat box as we speak.
Looking forward. So, Shirina, can I share my screen?
Yes, just you should have access to that.
Right. All right. So please let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, very beautiful, very clear, making us all jealous. Take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Karthik. Well, hi guys, how are you all? Thank you for sparing your evening and coming online. First of all, I'd like to wish all of you, a very, very happy World Photography Day. I'm sure for all of you, photography means a lot. And I think what I want to do today in the next 15-20 minutes is share my journey of photography, show you a few things, and probably spread a message that I want all of you to know, because you guys are nature's ambassadors. And in the last 15 years of what I have learned, I want to, make a gist of it and share it with you in 15 minutes. So I hope it'll be a fun session. Thank you for coming online. And again, wish you all a very happy World Photography Day. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So what I thought today I'll do is spend a few minutes to tell people who don't know me personally about my little journey. I'll keep it very short. And I want to show some ideas on where I have worked, where I have spent time photographing wildlife. We all love wildlife, right? So I want to show you some of the wildlife that I have enjoyed photographing. I want to share a few thoughts. I would probably not show too many pictures about areas which all of you very well know. I'm sure you already know of many places like Ranthambore, Tadoba, Bandhavgarh, Kabini, and stuff like that. I'll try to show you some more wildlife images from across the globe. So guys, I'm seeing some of you are typing on the chat and pasting your email addresses. I think Karthik was telling you to do that on the Q&A along with your question, not on the chat. I'm going to focus on what I want to do. So thank you for staying here. So I just want to tell you about my journey. I'm from Mysore. I was born and brought up there. And being in Mysore, you have national parks on every direction from Mysore. Any direction you go from Mysore, you have national parks. You have places like Bandipur, you have places like Kabini, you have places like BRT, Mudumalai on one side, there is Wayanad on one more side, Bhadra, and it's a beautiful city, of course, 3 hours from Bangalore. So I was born and brought up in a place where wildlife filmmakers like Krupakar and Senani were my heroes. As a child, I watched what they did, and I was born and brought up there. So Mysore plays a very important part of why I became a wildlife photographer and why I fell in love with nature even before that. So as of now, I basically teach photography to people who want to learn and travel the globe. As Karthik mentioned, I run a small company called Toehold, and we travel the globe in order to do photography and bring back stories and stuff like that. So just to tell you, how did I start? My dad is a photographer. I was probably 3 or 4 years old when I started touching film SLRs like FM10 and stuff like that, because he was a photographer. I remember my high school, every trip I would take a Nikon SLR camera with a film roll in it, and my classmates would not even know what the settings are. How do I handle that? But as a child, I grew handling these kind of cameras. But I must admit, guys, I never was interested in photography, and I never dreamt that I'd make it a career or a job. And that's a photo of mine when I was 3 or 4 years old, shot by my father, of course. But only when I went into my early 20s and I started working, I started working as a techie in IT companies, I realized my calling or my passion was the wild and the wilderness and nature and beautiful landscapes and stuff like that. I was falling in love with nature, and I realized photography is an amazing medium of expression for me. And even though I was not really passionate about photography per se, I started using the camera as a tool to express what I was seeing and undergoing as a young man and the kind of changes I was undergoing in myself, and of course to show what changes were happening in this world. So I want you to understand that though I'm a professional photographer, I probably feel falling in love with my subject was the first ingredient for me to become a photographer. The camera is just a tool I use to express my passion. So for people who know me, I've seen some names. I remember some names here in the chat that I know for about 10, 12 years. Thank you all for coming online. This is a picture that I shot when I was still working in the IT industry as a weekend warrior, as I called myself back then. Every Friday evening, I'll run back to Mysore. I'll take my gypsy, go to Bandipur, go to Nagarhole, and do photography for Saturday, Sunday, and come back on Monday early morning to Bangalore. And on one such November evening, I photographed this picture. Just for people who don't know what this is, these are two monitor lizards. They're not Komodo dragons, they're monitor lizards. And they are actually standing on their hind legs and they are fighting. I can tell you they were fighting and they're not hugging and saying long time no see and stuff like that, because I saw them hissing around and like a wrestling federation match, they were putting each other down and fighting. And the hiss which was coming out of their mouth, I can still remember. It's been 14, 15 years now since this picture. This was the delimiter of my hobby photography to becoming something more serious. This picture, decorated the cover of Sanctuary Asia magazine in 2007. It was on the February issue of Sanctuary Asia, and that was when I announced to the world that, you know what, I can click good pictures as well. So I wanted to share my early celebration with you so that, you know, I can show what I do. The same year, I was traveling a lot to Bandipur and Kabini because I had only weekends at my disposal. I couldn't travel farther and take too much leave because I was a techie working in the IT industry. For record, I was working with Accenture and America Online as a user experience designer. I was designing websites and stuff like that. The same year, I happened to be in Kabini in the summer. And I remember this was my birthday gift to myself. And in this week-long stay in Kabini, I remember counting 500 elephants on one safari, in a boat safari. I mean, I was the only guest in that resort that week. And on that evening, I counted 540 plus elephants on the banks of Kabini. And those were the glorious days. And on that evening, I photographed this image. And this is something which changed my life, guys. This is an image of a matriarch, an elephant, which was kind of a little upset with everything going on there. She was actually on a small island where black-bellied terns were nesting, and she basically was walking around that island where terns were irritating her, and she was already upset. And when she saw my little boat approach the bank of this little island, she started running towards me. And I suspect it could be a mock charge. I didn't want to test it by staying there longer. I pushed our boat inside into deeper waters, and I shot this picture. I must tell you for records, for people who don't know about this picture, I'm sure everybody who know me personally would know this picture of mine, but I'm sure there are so many new friends here. This picture was shot using a very, very humble 8,000 rupees, 70 to 300 lens. And this was my first award. This happened to win a prize in the Sanctuary Wildlife Photography Awards in 2007. I was shot in 2006, and this changed my life. So for some of you who want to know the technicalities of this picture, this is not a shadow, guys. This is a picture of an animal against a brighter background, and this is called a silhouette. How do you spell a silhouette? S-I-L-H-O-U-T-T-E, silhouette. I want you guys to make a note of that word and search for how do you photograph silhouettes. Usually when you have a brighter sky and you have a lovely evening sky, making a silhouette is easy when you ask the camera to measure the light on the background and not of the subject. So I had set my settings of my camera to shoot a silhouette, and nature, pardon me, presented herself in this way. And I was lucky enough to photograph the scene just like this. So this happened to win that award. What's happening here is the elephant charging me. So after this, guys, life changed. I quit my IT job. I started doing photography a little more seriously, more frequently, longer, farther. And ever since, I have traveled the globe in order to do photography. And in India, this is my footprint in India. So far, I have traveled to these kind of places in India, from the Nilgiri Biosphere Reserve, where I started doing photography, from Ranganthittu, Bandipur, Kabini, Nagarhole, Wayanad, and stuff like that, to areas like, Gujarat, where I went for Run of Kutch and those kind of places. Then Rajasthan, where I went to Ranthambore, Corbett National Park, northeast of India, Assam, Manas, Kaziranga. Then I went to Sundarbans. I went to Bhitarkanika, which is an amazing place in Orissa, which is a mangrove delta, which is very similar to Sundarbans, except for there's no tiger there. I enjoyed photographing kingfishers there in Bhitarkanika. Then, of course, I have also done a lot of photography of tigers in central India, in places like Bandhavgarh, Kanha, and stuff like that, apart from venturing to areas in the south like Anomalais and stuff like that. So this is pretty much, of course, not to mention, I have recently been traveling a lot to the Himalayas as well, apart from going in the past as well to photograph snow leopards. In the recent times, photographing snow leopards has become relatively easier, though it's still not as easy as photographing a tiger, but you can at least hope to go and find a snow leopard. 10 years ago, if somebody asked you, have you photographed a snow leopard, you would laugh at it and say, are you kidding me? How is it even possible? It's such a rare animal. But today, it is possible to go there and hope to find one. And if you're lucky, if you put your efforts, and if you're lucky, you will see some. This is an interesting perspective I wanted to show all of you. This is my global footprint, I can say. Hopefully not carbon footprint, but I basically have traveled to almost all the parts of the globe except for Australia and New Zealand. And I hate to say that I want to go there soon, and that's an area I haven't worked on well. Why I wanted to show you this, guys, is to tell you how I feel as today's wildlife photographers and today's ambassadors of nature. We need to have a global perspective, not just a local perspective of what's happening in a national park 3 hours from me. This is, the backwater female. This is the matkasur male. That is the arrowhead. This is the God knows what. That kind of knowledge is great to have. But I think as a wildlife photographer, you need to have a global perspective of what's happening to this planet. I must tell you that the reason why I started traveling to all these interesting places in the world is a very selfish motive. Because I am sent to this planet for a purpose, and I wanted to make sure I at least see this planet to the fullest extent, guys. Not really to do some major conservation work or anything. I want to first see this beautiful planet, which is why I started traveling to all these parts of the world as a young man. But in the due course of these 15 years of going to all these places, I have learned a lot about this planet. I have learned a lot about what people like you and me can do using our camera, which is an amazing tool which can show stories, which can inspire people, which can create from our grandmother to our granddaughters, grandsons and grandfathers, inspire them to understand about the very world we live in. And probably, hopefully, in the years to come, make change or try to do whatever we need to do as citizens of this world. So I'm sure traveling the globe is not, let's say, an economical way. It requires a lot of money and it requires a lot of investment. But without getting into details of that, I think if you can, you would really enjoy going across the globe and looking at different wildlife. So I just want to spend 5-10 minutes to show you some of the variety of things that I have worked on. After this 10-15 minutes, I'll definitely take questions. I'm sure there are moderators who are picking up questions which needs to be answered. So from Arctic to Antarctica, from the far east of Russia to the west of this world, like the Grand Central area, America, Central America, South America, and Southeast Asia, and of course, Africa, which is the Mecca of wildlife. So I have traveled all these places and I want to share some stories with you. Before that, talking about photography per se, I feel there are different kinds of wildlife photographers that exist in this world. So for example, let's say this is a picture I shot of this beautiful tigers in Corbett years ago. Now, if you ask me if this is an award-winning picture or not, my answer would be no, it cannot win an award. However sharp it is, however beautiful the tigress is, however beautiful this scene is, very well processed, beautiful photo, but still, this is what I consider a great document or a great documentation of this tigress in Corbett. And this picture can be used, of course, for many purposes, but talking about different kinds of wildlife photography that you can do, this is a documentation kind of a photograph. Now, if you look at a photograph like this, by the way, this is the famous B2 in Bandhavgarh. I photographed this, I think, in 2011, April. I remember dates very well. He basically killed this spotted deer early in the morning and fed on it. We all stood and watched till he finished his meal at around 8 o'clock. He gets up and starts walking. And before he walks, he picks up the head of the spotted deer. And it was almost like showing all the people who are watching him saying, look at this. This is me, the tiger, and this is my trophy. And he walked across for about a few minutes, dropped this head of the spotted deer and walked away and crossed the road and vanished. And this is something which I call a behavioral image, where you show something very interesting in wildlife photography. At the same time, wildlife photographers bank a lot on some amazing action. For example, this I photographed very recently in Bandhavgarh National Park. I'm showing you the same subject, but trying to show you different kinds of wildlife images that we all can make. Now, this I would call as an action photograph, which shows some behavior, but has some drama and action. And of course, you can see even the saliva from the mouth of the male tiger is spilling off, and it's mid-air. And of course, because it was a winter morning and because the tiger called loudly and roared, you can see how you can even see the breath of the tiger out there. And of course, below there is the poor female who was, I think they were mating on that day. And this is an action shot. So this is one more way of doing wildlife photography, but the most attractive way of why I do wildlife photography is to produce images, what I call creative perspectives of nature. Now, we saw a documentation shot, we saw a behavioral shot, we saw an action shot, and now what I consider a creative and artistic perspective is something like this, where I do this in order to create that wow factor in the viewer, because they would have seen photographs of tigers and leopards and elephants and stuff like that every day on Facebook and social media and stuff like that, on various WhatsApp groups. Now, today, if you have to stand out as a wildlife photographer, you need to have that extra wow factor in your images. And I feel one of the ways to achieve that is by being a creative photographer, where, I keep telling participants of my workshops that you can close your eyes and only then you will see something that the naked eyes cannot see. And for example, this is a technique where I underexpose the picture to get this black background, which was created by the strong light in Ranthambore National Park of this beautiful tiger called Noor. And I could separate her where the light was falling on her like a spotlight on a stage with a dark background. And I feel making images like these, though is not like a conservation photo, it is very much aligned to the larger goal of conservation, because if you don't attract the common man, and if you don't make them fall in love with nature and wildlife, they would not start learning about the issues and problems and all the other things that they need to know. My tactic is first attract people to something and then tell them what problems exist there. And so far, I feel it's been working well for me. So I have photographed snow leopards in Spiti recently, and of course in Ladakh is also a great place for photographing snow leopards. And this is a picture of an amazing sighting that I had. Just a quick second to look at this image. It's basically a snow leopard which killed an ibex in front of our eyes this February, and he was feeding on this carcass for a long time, 4 days in the cold there. So snow leopards are amazing. So I just want to show you some more pictures of different parts of the globe, and I'm sure in India, when somebody is able to travel, they would definitely go to Africa, and Africa has been a very, very sacred place for me. I've been to especially this national park, which all of you must know, the Masai Mara National Park, about 43 times. And I have passports with only Kenya visas and all the pages in 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14. And since 16, 17, 18, 19, I've been traveling once or twice a year to Kenya. I have colleagues who would go there as well. But as a wildlife photographer, what I look forward to in places like Africa is, of course, make this fine art creative imagery, or make these spectacular action shots that, it's very difficult to make if you're not very skilled with your technique and photography equipment, and of course, understand animal behavior. I must tell you, people who have been with me, if they are on this, webinar, they would understand how we shot this image. I basically was sitting next to this cheetah who was sleeping in the rain. And when she got up and, got rid of all the water on her body, she looked at a distance where there was a sole impala grazing. And I told my driver guide saying, you know what, she's looking at that as a prospective hunt. Let's leave her and go on the exact opposite side of where the impala is without disturbing the hunt. And I was 90 degrees from the cheetah and the impala. And I think that was the day when things were in my favor, and this happened. And I was very good with my camera technique of autofocusing, composition, follow through, maintain the right distance, knowing what's the lens I need to use, and then rest was history. And this is a great shot of that action. I have 23 shots of this action, but I chose this as the picture that I'd like to show viewers because of the view that they are giving to the camera. And of course, a lot of this mud spilled across, the posture of the cheetah, the tail, the impala trying to make a turn, and this was a dramatic perspective. You can see at a distance, there's this cub which is slightly out of focus because the cubs were waiting for the mom to make a kill, and then they came and started feeding. Some questions coming in on the chat. The distance between me and the cheetah was approximately about 100 feet. I had positioned myself about 200 feet away, but then there was some action which happened. The cheetah started running on the left and right of my frame. And then when I followed through, I think this action happened at around 100, 125 feet approximately. Of course, it's just my assumption, guys. I was not there measuring through a tape, so you should understand it's an approximate number. So let's go ahead. Africa is a great place for me because I love to use the light. I love when the light is almost going to end. the subtle low light in the evening and the beautiful light in the morning. I make a lot of beautiful images in these times of the day. Like the lions, I like to sleep in the middle of the day when they are in the bush and they are taking an afternoon nap. This is something which I want all of you to know. Using the right time of the day for photography is very important. Let's go a little to a different continent. I want you to come now to South America. In South America, there's this beautiful country called Brazil, and it borders Paraguay. And in the middle of these two countries, there's this beautiful wetland, what we call as the Pantanal. Just for records, Pantanal is basically a wetland which is probably as big as Karnataka in area. And this is, of course, the ghost. We call that the phantom of the wetlands in our tourism language. Jaguars were very tough to spot until 15 years ago. And last 10 years, like snow leopards, there have been tourism mechanisms to find them in the wild. And we do jaguar photography sitting in a boat and driving around rivers, because jaguars live very close to the edges of the rivers, because they hunt and feed on animals which are called caimans. They're like crocodiles. They live in these rivers and they hunt in the water. Just for records, jaguars are the only other big cats which I know of which love to stay in the water like the tigers. All other cats like lions and cheetahs and leopards come and drink and leave. Jaguars spend time in the water, and it's great to watch them. And this is the caiman. This was my first ever sighting of a jaguar with a caiman. This is probably etched in my memory, and I cannot forget this sight. When I first went there were a few boats photographing, and they all were pointing their camera towards this direction. And I asked, what happened? Where's the jaguar? And after 2 or 3 seconds, this jaguar came up from the underwater, which it had gone down to pick up this jaguar, and they came out. And this is something which I really cannot forget today. If you go down a little south from Brazil, this is the Patagonia area in the border of Argentina and Chile. And this happens to be my current fixation. I'm really mad about this place currently. This is, of course, the mountain lion or the puma. And this is a place which requires a lot of physical effort, very similar to the Himalayan snow leopard expedition. But here we travel in cars to different parts. We stop down, we climb up a ridge, we take a binocular or a spotting scope, and we start looking for a puma. Once we find a puma, we have to start walking towards it on foot. And depending on the behavior of the puma, we will know whether the puma allows us to go close, or if it is a skittish puma, and we maintain a distance using a telephoto lens. This was a picture shot using an 800 millimeter lens. And this was a puma which was called Simba by the locals there. I think this is one of the beautiful places. The mountains of Patagonia is one of the spectacular landscapes that I'd love to go again and again. You see in the background, this is a picture worth learning a lot. This is a picture which I call an animal in habitat picture, where you see the proportion of the animal is much smaller than what was here, because here I am trying to show the puma. Here I'm trying to show the puma in the landscape of Patagonia. And people who know Patagonia, and especially Torres del Paine means the towers of Paine, which is a famous landmark in Patagonia. And people can recognize the place I have shot this picture just by looking at those broken towers in Patagonia. So please remember, animals and habitats are really an important way of photographing and presenting wildlife. The last region I want to come to, polar regions. I work in the Arctic and Antarctica quite a lot. The polar regions are very, very sacred to me, because I think the world's mirror is in the poles, and you can see what's happening to the world every day in the polar regions. Here we talk about climate change, global warming. 30 years from now, this can happen. 30 years from now, that can happen. But in the poles, today it is happening, and you can see that right now. So that's why I travel to the polar regions a lot. And this animal happens to be God for me. When I see this animal, I feel, in Kannada, we use this word called sakshatkara. And that is what happens to me when I see the polar bear. And every time a polar bear, appears in front of my eyes, I feel God has Bhagwan Pratyaksha ho gaya type. I love the polar bear so much, and this is what it does to me as a emotional, feeling when I see the animal. And this time, I'm photographing the polar bear from a very close-up distance. I'm using a 24 to 70 millimeter lens. A very exceptional situation. You cannot go close to a polar bear mostly, but in this occasion, I was lucky that the polar bear came to the edge of the ice where we were, and I could manage this perspective. Just for you to understand, how do we do photography in the Arctic? We use something called as a Zodiac, which is a rubber boat in which we are 5, 6 of us and zooming around these areas, which are called glaciers. And we travel in the big ship, which is about 50 meters long, 12, 15 photographers on board. And once we see a polar bear at a distance, usually we'll be sleeping. Just for your records, the Arctic has 24-hour sunlight in the summer. That is June, July, August, and stuff like that. Somebody will come on your door and knock and say, polar bear 2 kilometers ahead. And then we get up and we brush our teeth, wash our face, wear the inners, wear the first layer, second layer, the jacket, the parka, the cap, the gloves, and we come out and still the polar bear is a kilometer ahead. And once we start getting close, the captain will make a decision whether we'll take this rubber boat out of the ship and venture close, or we'll do photography from the big mothership itself. And Svalbard is, heaven on earth for me. I really want all of us to realize the importance of the poles by showing Indians pictures of the polar regions. Look at this picture. I shot it with an 800 millimeter lens. And the same shot, a couple of seconds later, I pulled out a smaller lens, which is a 300 millimeter lens, to capture the scene. And now you can see, just compare the two pictures, you can see that one is a habitat kind of a shot, one is a close-up of the polar bears. It's important for us to produce both perspectives. I feel not only important to show the animal in frame, because guys, we all know how a polar bear looks like. But what's the job of today's wildlife photographer is to show the polar bear with today's world, which is changing by the minute. And I feel wildlife photographer's duty is to show that the polar bear hasn't changed for 1,000 years. It's looked the same since 1000 AD. But what has changed since 1900 to 2020 is the landscape, the ice, the global warming, the climate change. That has to come across in our photographs as wildlife photographers. So this was a picture, I'm sure some of you know this. This was a picture I shot using an 8 millimeter lens, guys. This was an 8-15 fisheye lens, an 8 millimeter lens. And this happens to be one of my most popular photographs of the polar bear. It's not necessary to have an 800 millimeter lens to win an award, guys. That's what the message I want to bring across. You can make spectacular pictures of wildlife even with a wide angle lens. A lot of people feel, I don't have a long lens. How do I do wildlife photography? Here's the answer. Think about the landscape and the animal and present a perspective that will simply make people wonder about this beautiful planet. So this is a picture that has won a lot of prizes for me. And it might seem like I see some comments there that, the ice is broken and, this is the state of the Arctic currently because there's a lot of global warming happening. It's a symbolic representation of what's happening under the feet of the polar bear. Polar bear needs ice. The animal is called Ursus maritimus, which means it's a marine mammal. It's the largest land carnivore, but it's also a marine mammal. And if there is no ice, it cannot feed on seals. So it needs ice to travel from Canada to Russia to Norway to whatnot. So there's a picture which defines my life so far. Of course, Antarctica is also a spectacular place that I go to. Antarctica would have been the universe's best place if there were, if it was accessible. It's really tough to go there. It requires a lot of traveling, 2 days of going on a ship and passing through the Drake's Passage and stuff like that. Penguins, of course, for people who don't know Antarctica much, penguins live down south in Antarctica. Polar bears live in the north in the Arctic region. Last destination before I talk about another genre of photography, Kamchatka. For people who have not heard of where Kamchatka is, I love this place. Kamchatka is the far east of Russia. If you understand the world map, Alaska, it's the opposite bank of Alaska, which is the Russian area called Kamchatka. It seems Russia sold Alaska to America a few years ago for a very small amount. I am so feeling bad that, it's such a beautiful place. Alaska, Russians sold it to the US. But, Kamchatka and Alaska are very similar. This is how you do photography in Kamchatka. You're on foot and you are walking around in these rivers, which bring a lot of salmon back to the lakes where they were born. And that is what is called spawning. Salmon come back to the lakes where they were born, and bears know that there'll be 500,000 salmon coming back to this lake. And they all come down from the hills and the tundra to these lakes to fish. And that's a great sight. Sorry, I'll go back a little. That's a great sight to look at, bears fishing salmon. And that's what happens in Kamchatka. I am keeping some bird photos for some questions and answers later on. So this is a keel-billed toucan from the Central American rainforests, especially Costa Rica. This is a macaw, great green macaw. I love bird photography. Anybody wants to know how to do great bird photography, please get in touch with me. I'll be happy to share a lot of information about that. Hummingbirds in Central America. This is called a rufous-tailed hummingbird. And we also use interesting techniques here to capture hummingbirds by using flash in daylight to create this action freeze of the wings. It's not shot at night, it's shot in the daylight at midday, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock and stuff like that. Using flash for bird photography in the daylight. If anybody has questions about flash, whether it's harmful to birds, please feel free to ask. I'll share my insights on why it is not harmful at all. Creative perspectives, as I keep saying, birds in flight and intentionally motion blurring this hummingbird's wings so that the hummingbird is sharp, but only the moving wings are blurred to show a sense of dynamism and movement in these pictures. All right, so Costa Rica is one of my favorite places as well. I mean, which place is not a favorite place if it has such wildlife? 0.3% of the global land mass, but close to 3 to 4% of the world's biodiversity exists in Costa Rica. And that's why it's such a beautiful country to go to. We'll talk about birds if anybody has questions later on. The last area which I wanted to inspire people to think about is underwater photography, guys. Today in India, there are 100,000 people who have photographs of arrowhead, matkasur, kumba, and backwater female, and I don't know what not, tigers live in Corbett and Tadoba and stuff like that. I just know all of these vague names. What's important today is some of us, a subset of us, should start looking at wildlife which is underwater, the coral reefs, marine life, and think about how those also need our attention, because you guys, photographers, are nature's ambassadors. If you go down there and bring back pictures and show how a coral reef looks like to your uncle, aunt, father, mother, husband, and wife, that's how we'll educate people. Because these guys, adults who became a commerce graduate or an engineer or a mechanical or a doctor, will not learn about marine, conservation, about marine life anymore. They have not studied that in school. The only way they learn about all this is when people like you, who are the most important part of this chain of conservation warriors, will bring back stories from underwater, from the Arctic, and all of these different places to show it to people here. So underwater photography, absolutely delightful. It's the most pleasurable part of this world, guys. I take people to all parts of the globe, but when it comes to underwater, I go there only for myself because I want some place to enjoy as well. And I do a lot of underwater photography there. Look at this. This is a turtle in the Andamans. He came to my camera because he saw another turtle in my camera's dome and he started interacting. Maybe he was looking for a mate and he didn't realize he was looking at himself in the reflection of my dome. This is at 11 mm focal length used to photograph this image. So that's a small journey across the globe in the last, I think I've taken a little more than the time prescribed. I'm very sorry about that. But I wanted to make one last comment before I allow the moderators to take questions and help us answer this. A lot of people in India tell me, there is so much of wildlife in India. Why do you have to go to Costa Rica? Why do you have to go to the Arctic? Why do you have to go to Antarctica and bring back these pictures and stories? And in fact, one of them was very strong, opinionated, and told me, why do you have to go and talk about polar bears when we have so much of problems in Sundarbans and we have the Sundarbans tiger dying, and why are you not photographing Sundarbans? A couple of reasons for that, guys. Though I'm a very patriotic person, I feel we should not look at this world from the boundaries of political boundaries perspective. Secondly, I want all of us to understand, when the Arctic is melting, the very polar bear's problem is going to create a sea level rise and make sure your tiger sitting in Sundarban is going to drown when the mangroves are no longer able to sustain there. So the world is interconnected much more than we think it is. And as photographers, if you have the pleasure of going to different parts of the world, it's your, let's say unofficial duty to bring back stories and present it to people around you. Otherwise, they'll never see a polar bear or a penguin or a jaguar or a puma and stuff like that. So I think that's my monologue. Thank you very much for listening to me. I'll be happy to see what the moderators and Karthik have in store for the next few minutes.
Thank you, Jayanth. That was a fascinating presentation. I loved every bit of it. It was really nice, and I love the images that you've managed to collect painstakingly from all over the world. And I think it's certainly a lesson to all of us that we've got to look beyond what we have around us. And of course, you know, the beauty lies in the eyes of the beholder. All of us can see beauty around us. But, you know, I certainly want to, you know, add that while, you know, for someone who really wants to get out there and look at all of these species, I certainly am one of those people. I want to go and see the jaguars at some point in time. Never had a chance to go around to do that. And but I'd like to add that, you know, people who are watching this webinar, you know, don't need to feel that you need thousands of dollars to be able to travel, you know, thousands of miles in order to get good photos. You can do that right in your backyard. You know, start small. That's exactly how Jayanth shared his lovely story of how he started off, you know, around Mysore, in his backyard. So every ant, butterfly, snake, bird around you is an incredible subject for us to start off. And then, of course, you know, like Jayanth has shown, the sky is the limit. And I think at this point of time, Sandhi Sandhi is a colleague of mine, and Sandhi and Shirina are both with us on this webinar today. And they're going to help us moderate by making sure that we try and get as many questions as possible covered. And I think several people have included questions in the Q&A. And you've all seen Jayanth's inspiring presentation. It was very, very insightful. And we are going to move on to that point. Jayanth, I had a couple of questions for you before we open it up to the audience. You know, what's your favorite animal? Is there one animal that you'd happily photograph again and again and again?
Yeah, I think I partially answered it already. The polar bear, of course, because I think that's the mascot of this world's wildlife for me. And I think, as I said, I feel like I've seen God every time I find this animal walking across the horizon, a small cream dot walking. And, you know, when my binoculars are focusing and I see the polar bear, my heart's beating faster than 140. And I really get excited seeing the polar bear. Undoubtedly the polar bear.
That's excellent. And, you know, in a way, I think it's really sad what the polar bears are going through today. I've seen images of polar bears looking all brown with mud on them, looking in garbage cans and places like that to eat because the ice is melting. And I think, as you rightly pointed out, the climate change impact is going to hit all of us. And I think the polar bear is a symbol of what the future holds in store if humanity doesn't do something quickly. Was there ever a moment, Jayanth, that you thought you were too close to the action?
Absolutely. In fact, one of the polar bear images that I showed, I didn't realize we were shooting, and suddenly she walked close to us, and she must have been about 10 feet away from us. That's when my guide said, guys, we are leaving this spot because polar bears can jump 10 feet across, and, you know, they jump from an ice floe to an ice floe, and we were pretty close without our intention. And when she came very close, we had to leave. And thankfully I had the right lens and I could capture a wide angle moment. That was pretty close. Of course, Karthik, in India, we have had a lot of elephants that, you know, mock charge you at times, which is, you know, something which, is exciting, but, you know, it's like, unfortunately, they get stressed at times. Sometimes animals get close. Brown bears a lot, brown bears, because we are on foot. We're walking in the forest in the tundra, and suddenly a brown bear gets up from sleep and starts running away. And we are 5-7 feet from it, and that's a scary moment for us. And of course, it happens quite a lot.
That's hilarious. Yeah, I've been attacked by a bear a couple of times, so I know what that feels like. But I'm glad you haven't been attacked by a bear or anything. Is there one piece of equipment, Jayanth, that you cannot live without in your bag, in your camera gear bag?
Right. I think for photography enthusiasts, I really cannot go out to the field without the 70 to 200 millimeter telephoto lens. I can be there without the 600 millimeter. I can be there without the 800 millimeter. But I enjoy photographing animals in their habitat. The way I look at it is I first use the telephoto lens, capture a close-up and a portrait and stuff like that. But then after the excitement dies, I start using my brain a lot more than my heart. And usually the brain tells me that a landscape image of the animal is very important, and not often we can go very close to the animal. So the 70 to 200 millimeter lens is my must-have lens in the field. Of course, I am a big believer of using tripods. A lot of wildlife photo enthusiasts sit in the safari cars and do photography. They don't use tripods. But if you want to do photography on foot, tripods are a must if you want telephoto lenses to be used. So 70 to 200, Karthik, that's my favorite lens.
That's great. I think, people on this webinar are picking up a lot of ideas and tips and suggestions. So thank you for sharing that. Jayanth, big animals like lions, gorillas, and elephants, tigers, of course, pumas, and, jaguars get a lot of attention.
Right.
Are there any unsung heroes, that people deserve to know about, that you photographed, that you'd like to share?
Of course. So basically, initially when I started traveling out, right, I went to places which were really unique. For example, Bhitarkanika. Even today, I do not see it on the first 25 destinations in India to photograph wildlife. It's really a relatively lesser known place. So I think there are places like that where you find all the kingfishers, like the black cap, brown winged, the ruddy, the collared, and of course the common pied and the blue and stuff like that. So I think those kind of places are amazing. Apart from that, the rainforest, Karthik. I think the rainforests in India have a gold mine of species that people should venture and start photographing: the frogs, the amphibians, the snakes, and so many such beautiful things. So I think I've also done a lot of photography of these kind of animals in Central America, in Costa Rica, like frogs. And what do you call these? The southern rattlesnake, which is one of my favorite reptiles. Looking at it, you get goosebumps on your body. So I think quite a few species that it's not really a polar bear or a tiger like a celebrated species. I think India has a lot of such things for even insects for that matter, quite a lot. I know a lot of people who go to parks around in Bangalore and photograph amazing insects, and I learn about them from these macro photography enthusiasts as well. I think
That's amazing. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that, Jayan. I think in the future, this webinar is showing us that I think we probably need to do a lot of, follow-up sessions about macro photography, underwater photography, and I think we can really convert people into wildlife photographers and get the word out, because I think through this we can create the kind of awareness about protection of nature around us that nothing else can do as well. I'd like to ask you, what good do you think wildlife photography can do? And how do you see photographers changing the world and protecting wildlife? I know you have answered this in your webinar, but some people have joined later on. So I thought for the benefit of everyone who's there, it might help for you to just lay that out nicely. Thank you.
Sure. So I'll give you an example. I'm sure all the hundreds of people who are online today have seen the recent spike of WhatsApp videos and pictures of the Black Panther from Kabini that they've all seen. I'm sure nobody is an exception to this overdose of the Black Panther pictures that we have seen, right? So now I think a lot of people would want to associate wildlife photography with wildlife conservation. Like I saw a question there, somebody says, have you saved any animal by these pictures that you have shot? Now, I feel there are different level of, like, you guys are hardcore on the field protecting animals and doing stuff. But for most people here, and for a person like me who are photography enthusiasts, I think we do play a big role in this larger goal of how we can conserve and protect wildlife. What we do is, I think we unofficially bridge the gap between science and the common man. Because, there are a lot of scientific journals, papers, white papers, God knows what colored papers, with a lot of information and data about behavior, about ecology, about science and stuff like that. And there's this 1.5 billion people who don't even read that, because there's no bridge between these two worlds. I feel as photography enthusiasts, we are that unofficial bridge of learning from nature and science and scientists and biologists and research and all of that, and use that data, information, knowledge, and present pictures. And I'll tell you how wildlife conservation and photography are associated. When I get a WhatsApp message from my milkman, from my maid, from my bank representative, or from my driver, and they forward the Black Panther images to me, assuming I don't know about it, that shows that images can reach the grassroots of this population as well. So I think wildlife photographers are the only species on this planet who can spread across information about wildlife, the beauty, the problems, the positives, the negatives, and everything to every human being in this country. So I think it's a very important role. I would love if scientists start considering organized programs where they can use this workforce who mean so much for wildlife and nature, but probably don't know exactly how they can use their interest, passion, skills, and time and money to do the larger good. So I think every one of them here is playing a role in protecting wildlife of this world.
That's great. What do you think is one of the most challenging aspects of photographing wildlife?
I think the biggest challenge is, of course, being patient. You need to learn how to accept. You need to learn to accept lack of spottings and sightings, and a lot of effort required to go around and find these animals. So I think patience is the most important thing for a wildlife photographer, because 8 out of 10 times we'll not spot what we want to, or we'll not be able to photograph something. The biggest challenge is, of course, to learn about wildlife. It's not only about these important things, it's about the rest of the things that we need to learn. And this knowledge is changing every few years. And being on the top of the game, improving. So Karthik, when I was growing up, I was a teenager. I know a student of my father who learned photography would come and show a picture of an elephant crossing the main road in Mudumalai and telling us that he won a prize for that image. And today, can you believe a picture like that can win an award? Today, it's a mundane, run-of-the-mill image because all of us have that 100 times. So every 5 years, what's considered a good photograph and benchmark for what's a good photograph is evolving. As wildlife photographers, we need to keep upping our skill and our tradecraft and learning from what's happening around the world and improving ourselves. Otherwise, probably there's not any species in this world which has not been photographed. So what needs to be done today is to understand how this animal's world is changing and presenting it to the world.
And Jayanth, to that, I'd like to add to what you've said that, anybody who wants to take good photos of wild animals in their natural habitat, of course, needs two very important traits, patience and patience. They need a hell of a lot of patience. And of course, they need to really be willing to wait and wait and wait. I recall in my days of, doing wildlife research on tiger ecological status surveys in Nagarhole, Bandipur, Pench, Kana, and several places in Kaziranga and places like that. There was in one particular location in, I think, Pench National Park where we had finished the work. In the morning, I did a long 5-kilometer transect. I finished the transect and I spotted a tiger, a tigress with 5 cubs, and she was crossing the river. Mm-hmm. She had made a sambar kill, and I was so keen to watch her, with her cubs. And so I decided to sit on top of a tree and wait and watch. It was 50 degrees Celsius, so you can imagine that's 120 degrees Fahrenheit. It was hot as hell. I was melting, and I would have to go in the day, drench myself in the river, come back soaking wet, and I'd be dry. My clothes would be crispy dry in 30-40 minutes. Finally, she came late in the evening, and I settled for no photography, but just to watch. And it was such a delight to just watch that tigress and her cubs, come back, and the way they were careful, watching everything, and she sensed that I was there. And
Right.
of course, after a little while, they went away. But it took me the whole day. I waited for hours, probably about 13 hours or so, in order for me to, see her. So of course, I was bitten nicely by mosquitoes and several other insects by the end of that experience. But I think now I'm going to introduce you all to Sandeep Priya, who's our manager, corporate and philanthropic partnership at Wildlife SOS. Sandy is passionate about animals and loves working on wildlife and sustainable development projects. She's been with us for over 4 years and was one of the people, along with Shirina, who contributed to the National Geographic Wild series made on Wildlife SOS called India's Jungle Heroes, which was released earlier this year. So I request Sandhi to start the question and answer session now. Because we are limited on time, if we miss your questions, we will make sure we email them the answers to you guys. So please, Sandhi, it's all yours now. Go ahead and address questions to either Jayanth or to me as you see fit.
Sure. Thank you so much, sir. So the first question is for Jayanth. Question is, do you have any suggestions for photographing birds in flight?
Right. So I'll make a quick suggestion there. So if you want to photograph birds in flight, you need to understand a couple of things very, very well. One is, of course, how to handle exposure, because when birds are flying, the backgrounds are changing. So now it's in front of a sky, then it's in front of a hill, then it could be something else. So you need to understand how you'll handle exposure. The more important thing is to understand how you can track focusing. And in today's cameras, you have various ways to do that. You need to be on continuous focusing. A tip for people who use DSLRs, use the back button focusing. If you're a Nikon guy, use AFC. If you're a Canon guy, you can use AI servo. And you need to use the back button, use the right amount of autofocus area, and of course, track them by pressing the AF on button. The way it works is we track, and click pictures. We don't continuously click pictures because we need to track them in flight. It's a long lesson. If you want to learn this in detail, I have a webinar called Autofocus Masterclass, but in the interest of time, that's the shortest answer I could give you.
Thank you, Jayanth. The next question is for Karthik, sir. What is wildlife photography according to you?
According to me, it's an opportunity for people to see what images these animals make and what those animals mean behind those images. And I might not have the financial resources, or I might not want to get on a plane and fly all the way to Alaska and spend thousands of dollars to go see a polar bear. But thanks to Jayanth, I can see every little hair on that polar bear. I can see the expression, I can see the habitat. So I think wildlife photography is a way of conveying the beauty and the wealth that we have on this planet, and that we need to protect it, and it deserves our protection. That's my definition of wildlife photography.
Thank you, sir. So next question is for Jayanth. How tough is wildlife photography from other forms of photography?
Good question. I think I'll be very honest, guys. I have had colleagues of different genres. I have a colleague called Darren, who is a glamour photographer, who's standing in front of stunning models and taking their pictures. And I wonder, how can you even shoot a bad picture? The subjects are so beautiful. And when I tried doing that, I realized it's so hard. It's so hard. I feel we always find something that we don't know well much harder than what we know very well. For example, for a swimming champion, swimming is much more easier than climbing a rock. And for a rock climber, swimming is much tougher. So I think being a wildlife photographer, I find wildlife photography pretty easy compared to, let's say, fashion and glamour photography. Having said that, all you need to do is understand how you can prepare for difficult times. Like, for example, you have to bear the weather sometimes, you have to be well dressed sometimes, you have to bear the torture of the heat sometimes. But if you have the passion, all these things are not a problem. One important point I wanted to make across here, guys, is if you love wildlife, all these things become, immaterial to you. I feel photographers who love their subjects excel in wildlife photography than photographers who love their camera much more than subject. So fall in love with wildlife and the rest of the things will not be tough at all.
Great. So the next question we have is for you, Jayanth.
Okay.
How many shots do you take to get a keeper?
Okay. It depends on the subject. If it's a bird or a mammal or a frog or something that has been photographed a lot, then I would probably not shoot too many. Also depends on what the subject is doing. For example, if the cheetah is standing and looking at the horizon, I would shoot pictures of kinds. But if there's a cheetah which is jogging, if there's a cheetah which is chasing an impala, so it depends on what the subject is and what the subject is doing. A keeper can be the first image I shoot, or it can be even after 10,000 images, not a keeper. So it depends on what the subject is, where I'm photographing it, what it is doing, and stuff like that. For me, a keeper is something that I can print and I can present it to the world. It's not something where it's not a great photo, but because I don't have this animal, I will keep this kind of an image. I'm not a documentary photographer. I like to make artistic fine art images which can go on the walls of houses and offices.
Great. Thank you, Jayanth. So the next question is for Karthik sir. Is there a misconception that you need to be wealthy to be a wildlife photographer?
I was waiting for someone to ask this. No, it's really not necessary to be wealthy to be a wildlife photographer. I think Jayanth also made that very clear, that India also has a lot of beautiful places and beautiful wildlife, and there are some rare species that you will not see anywhere else in the world. I mean, you can travel 14,000 kilometers and fly all over the world, but you only see sloth bears in India, for example. There are some species that you can't see anywhere else. So it's right here. And if you have the ability, the luxury, and someone offering you a great trip somewhere, then yes, by all means, take that opportunity and don't miss it. I would not miss it if someone gave me an opportunity to go and see, an incredible species somewhere in the Masai Mara or in Alaska. But like I said earlier, and I think Jayanth also pointed it out, we have wildlife all around us, monitor lizards, geckos, chameleons, calotus, fan-throated lizards. I mean, we have them all over here. And there are photographers, just like, some of us want to go to other places. There are thousands of photographers who come to India, throng to India, because they want to see the leopards, tigers, Asian elephants, and the species that we have over here, like the wild dogs and stuff like that. So certainly you don't need to be rich to be a wildlife photographer. What you need is, just like Jayanth said, have a keen interest in wildlife and want to capture those images, and have each image tell a story about that species and how that species needs human protection. Thank you.
Great. We'll take the last two questions now. So again, this question is for Karthik sir. Who was your biggest inspiration while growing up, and from where you got the idea to start Wildlife SOS?
Well, to be honest, I think animals inspired me. I learned something from animals all around every single day, and I would sit and watch them for hours and hours. And I think if you start doing that, if all of you start doing that, you watch animals, and I think they will inspire you. They teach you so much. So I would say, elephants, bears, tigers, leopards, they've all been teachers, and I think nature inspired me. And some of you may have already heard this, but growing up in Bangalore, I used to spend every opportunity and every full moon night biking off to Bannerghatta, and me and a couple of friends would go out there and sit on top of trees near a waterhole on full moon nights, watching wildlife. And I think that got me addicted to wanting to protect this incredible nature that we have around us, that a lot of people don't know about. And that's what inspired me to start Wildlife SOS. Just a crazy driving urge to protect what nature has. She's been so generous with us, but what have we given her back? We've only, damaged her, and we've got to try and give back and protect her, and can't leave the planet worse than we found it. So that's what inspired me. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So this question is for Jayanth. How do you choose between what lens to use and what are your precautions?
When I'm on a field day, I would use every lens from an 8mm lens to a 800mm lens if possible. So here's a funny thing. When people on my expeditions ask me, what lens should we bring for this morning session? So I tell them, please bring your longest lens, please bring your shortest lens, and everything in between. So the thing is, you could be photographing a portrait of an animal. You could be photographing an entire landscape with a small animal in it as a habitat shot. So I would choose what lens to use then, depending on what I'm seeing as a view, and not decide that before I leave Bangalore on an expedition. So I would keep all my tools, all my weapons at my disposal, and I would use the right weapon at the right time. When I say weapon, I'm talking about it from the perspective of making a beautiful photo. Depends on what I am seeing there, and that is not pre-decided, guys. It's something which flows from inside, and I will decide whether I'll use a wide angle lens or a telephoto lens or a super telephoto lens on that spot when I look at that landscape.
Great, great. Thank you so much, Jayanth. So due to limited time, we will be answering the remaining questions via email. So over to you, Karthik sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Sandhi. And thank you, Jayanth. This marks the end of our webinar for World Photography Day. Thanks everyone for joining us today. We are really glad that you could all be a part of this webinar with Jayanth, and we are delighted that Jayanth was able to spare so much time to share some of his secrets, share the incredible images that he's painstakingly taken, and hopefully we will have Jayanth in future sessions and to help inspire all of you to become conservationists through photography. I'd also like to add that Wildlife SOS hopes to start a series of webinars so that people can get hooked on to wildlife and become we need more giants out there to not giants but giants, right? You ever get misspelled as Giant, Giant?
People think it's the same.
Well, anyway, so all of you, please stay tuned to our social media channels for more updates. And to know more about Wildlife SOS, please go to our website, wildlifesos.org, or email us on info@wildlifesos.org. We will send you a recording of this webinar via email and also send you answers to your questions. Thank you all again, and we hope that you can join us and stay in touch with us. Take care, stay home, and stay safe. Bye, all you all.
Bye, guys.
Thanks,
Bye. Take care.
Jayanth.
Bye.
Bye.